You're watching an old film, black and white. Maybe it's a street scene, or a dinner table, or a jazz club where everyone is dressed like they actually tried. And something happens in your chest that you don't quite have a name for. It's not sadness, exactly. It's something closer to longing. Like you're watching your own life through a window, except the life on the other side of the glass looks more like yours than the one you're actually living. You put your phone down, and for a second, before the notifications come back and the noise rushes in, you think, I was supposed to be there. Not here. There. And then someone walks in, and you smile, and the feeling passes. But it doesn't go away. It never really does. If you've ever felt that way, and if you're here, there's a good chance you have. You probably already know what it's like to try and explain it to someone who doesn't. You mentioned that you prefer vinyl records or handwritten letters, or the pace of a life that didn't have notifications, and they look at you with that particular expression, a sort of polite confusion, like you're a little bit charming and a little bit eccentric and probably just going through a phase. What they don't see is that this isn't nostalgia for something you personally lived through. You can't miss a time you were never in, and yet the feeling is real. The pull is real. The sense that somewhere between then and now, something was lost, and that you are somehow the person most aware of that loss that is real. You're not dramatic, you're not ungrateful, and you are definitely not broken. What you are is someone whose deepest values don't match the era they were handed, and that is a genuinely difficult thing to carry. Now, here's what the world tends to get wrong about people like you. The assumption is that you're romanticizing the past, that you've built a fantasy out of old photographs and period dramas, and you've conveniently forgotten the parts of history that weren't so picturesque. And there may be some truth to that, we'll get to it. But the assumption underneath that the idea that this feeling is just sentiment, just aesthetics, just a personality quirk, that's where the story gets it wrong. Because for a lot of people, this isn't about the surface things. It's not really about the music or the clothes or the architecture, though it shows up there. It's about something deeper. It's about values, about what life was supposed to mean, about slowness and craft and depth, and the feeling that the things you care most about are precisely the things the modern world has decided it no longer has time for. That isn't nostalgia. That's a crisis of values. And those are two very different things. Think about someone, maybe it's even you, who grew up being told they were an old soul. Teachers said it. Grandparents said it with affection. It felt like a compliment, and maybe it was. But underneath that compliment was a quiet confusion that followed them into adulthood. They'd sit in rooms full of people their own age and feel like they were watching from a slight distance, not because they didn't like people, but because the conversations felt meaningless and surface level, because the humor was ironic and detached, because the culture around them rewarded cynicism, while they were, embarrassingly, still a believer in things. So they learned to perform a version of themselves that fit. They got good at the speed, at the tone, at the references, but in private, on long drives alone, or reading a letter from someone long dead in a book they found secondhand, they felt something unlock, like a part of them had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. That person didn't need to be fixed. They needed to be understood, and more than that, they needed to understand themselves. So let's talk about what psychology actually says is happening here. Because there are four concepts worth understanding, and once you see them, the feeling starts to make a lot more sense. The first is called value incongruence. It describes the gap between the values a person holds at their core and the values the culture around them prioritizes. Researchers in personality psychology have found this mismatch is one of the more persistent sources of quiet, low-level distress, the kind that doesn't look like a crisis from the outside, but quietly erodes a person's sense of belonging. If you value depth and the world rewards speed, if you value craftsmanship and the world rewards volume, if you value presence and the world is addicted to distraction, that gap doesn't just feel uncomfortable. Over time, it feels like exile. The second is something researchers and therapists have begun calling generational dysphoria. It's a term used to describe the experience of feeling chronologically displaced, not in a metaphysical sense, but in the very real sense that your temperament, your pace, your way of relating to the world aligns more closely with a different era than your own. It's not a diagnosis, but it is a recognized experience. And for the people living it, having a name for it matters enormously. Because the moment something has a name, it moves from a flaw to a phenomenon. From what is wrong with me to I see what's happening here. The third concept is what psychologists call the idealized past, sometimes referred to as a fantasy defense. This is where we have to be honest with ourselves for a moment. The past, we long for that slower, deeper, more meaningful world. It wasn't entirely real. Or rather, it was real for some people, some of the time, in some places. But it also contains suffering and injustice and limitation that we don't tend to include in the version we've built in our heads. The mind, when it's hurting, has a remarkable ability to construct a paradise it was never actually in. That's not weakness. It's a coping mechanism, but it's worth seeing clearly because the point isn't to live in the fantasy. The point is to understand what the fantasy is telling you about what you actually need. And finally, there's nostalgia itself. For a long time, psychologists considered nostalgia a form of mild pathology, a retreat from the present. But more recent research has reframed this significantly. Nostalgia, it turns out, serves a function. It reinforces identity. It provides a sense of continuity. It actually increases a person's feeling of connection to others and their sense that life has meaning. The longing you feel is not a symptom of something broken. It is your mind reaching for something real, for meaning, for rootedness, for the sense that you belong to something larger than this particular moment in time. Here's the thing underneath all of that. The people who feel born in the wrong generation are almost always people who feel things deeply, who pay attention, who notice what most people have learned to tune out. They notice when a conversation stays on the surface. They notice when something beautiful is being discarded for something faster. They notice the texture of the world in a way that most people, not because they're incapable, but because they're busy, don't pause to see. That sensitivity is not the problem. That sensitivity is the gift. It just comes without instructions and without a community until you find one. And here's where I want to be careful with you, because it would be very easy to tell you to simply accept the era you're in, to stop looking backward, to make peace with the present. And there is some truth in that. You do have to live in the world that exists, but that is not the whole story. Because the longing you carry for depth, for craft, for meaning, for slowness, that longing is not a wound to be closed. It is a compass. It is pointing you toward the kind of life, the kind of work, the kind of relationships and choices and daily rhythms that would actually feel like yours. The question is never, how do I stop feeling this way? The question is, what is this feeling asking me to build? There are people watching this right now who have spent years feeling like they arrived late to a party that already ended, who have quietly apologized for the things they love, who have made themselves smaller, faster, more ironic, more detached, because the world seemed to reward that and punish sincerity. I want to say something to those people directly. The people from the eras you admire, the writers, the craftsmen, the musicians, the thinkers, they are not gone. They live in the books you read and the records you play and the letters you find in old boxes and the films that make you feel that nameless thing late at night. Their values did not die with them. Their way of seeing the world did not disappear. It exists through you. You are not someone who was born too late. You are someone who was entrusted with something. You carry a standard for depth, for beauty, for meaning, at a time when those things are genuinely endangered. The past doesn't need you to live in it. It needs you to carry it forward. Use what they gave you. The patience they modeled. The craftsmanship they practiced. The way they wrote letters worth keeping and built things worth passing down. You don't have to abandon the present to honor them. You just have to bring what you know into it. because the world doesn't need more people who have made peace with shallowness. It needs more people who refuse to. And you, the person who has always felt slightly out of time, you might be exactly the kind of person this particular moment in history needs most. You are not a misfit. You are here to lead the way. If any part of this landed for you, not just intellectually, but in that quieter place where you actually recognized yourself, share it with someone who needs to hear it. There are a lot of people carrying this feeling alone and thinking it means something is wrong with them. It doesn't. It never did. And if you're somewhere in this story right now, still figuring out where you belong, you are not alone, not even close. The fact that you feel this deeply, that you notice what others walk past, that you still believe in things when the world keeps telling you not to, that is not your weakness. That is exactly what makes you worth listening to. You're probably someone who thinks carefully about who you are and why you move through the world the way you do, which means there is a lot more here for you. Watch the next video on screen now, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you there.